This week, I've heard the same phrase from multiple different sellers. I'm burned out. And what's interesting is they're not at all lazy, and they're not even inconsistent. And most importantly, they're not failing. What they did is they adopted a high volume, low end selling model to list at scale, price broadly, and run aggressive promotions. And now, they're exhausted. This strategy of theirs isn't what's broken, but the systems underneath it might be. Today, we're talking about why volume without infrastructure leads to burnout and how to fix it. Welcome to my so-called card life, the podcast where we talk about what actually happens when you try to run a real card business, the decisions, adjustments, and lessons that don't show up in highlight reels. Welcome to my so-called card life, an inside look at the life of a low-end card reseller, brought to you by JC3 Cards and Collectibles, a premier reseller of trading cards available today on eBay, Collects, and whatnot. Whether you're looking to fill out that new set or just rekindle memories with one of your favorite players from your favorite teams, let JC3 Cards and Collectibles help you find that card you're looking for and provide fast, secure delivery straight to your door. Over the past week, I've heard multiple variations of the same pattern. Sellers saying, I'm listing constantly. My store keeps growing. I'm always running promotions. And I feel like I can't stop. And the underlying issue isn't a lack of sales. It's that they never feel caught up. They adopted a high volume, low end listing approach. List at scale, price broadly, and use recurring discounting to create conversion. That model can absolutely work. And we see examples of stores that do just that every day. But what often gets overlooked is the infrastructure required to support that kind of volume. High output without workflow design creates a great deal of friction. And friction, over time, becomes burnout. Now, for context, here's what my current structure looks like. Slightly over 22,000 active listings. Monthly sourcing allocation caps in place, where I spend about 55% of that allocation on core arbitrage and bulk at card shows. An average order value of little over $5. Dedicated listing blocks of 5 per week. And a defined stop time every day of 10 p.m. My current friction rating this week? About a 3 out of 10. Not because of volume, but because I'm still sorting the remaining 2026 Top Series 1 long tail inventory. And that distinction matters. 22,000 listings without structure would feel very chaotic. But with structure, it's actually manageable. Burnout isn't about listing count. It's all about how the listing count is supported. Now, let's be clear. High volume, low end selling models are not at all flawed. In fact, they can be extremely efficient when executed properly. But they require an extremely low cost basis and streamlined listing workflows, highly organized storage systems, a defined promotional cadence, clear margin math, and consistent sourcing pipelines. In that environment, volume becomes very mechanical, predictable, repeatable. Where sellers struggle is when they adopt the visible tactics, the large listing counts, the broad pricing bands, aggressive coupons, without building the invisible structure underneath. Some of the more common friction points include listing reactively instead of batching, repricing emotionally instead of defining bands, running half off promotions without margin clarity, expanding listings without expanding organization, and never defining a daily stop time. The issue isn't at all effort, it's unmanaged complexity. And volume magnifies inefficiency. If your workflow has friction at 300 listings, it will feel absolutely chaotic at 3,000 listings. And if it has friction at 3,000 listings, it will feel completely exhausting at 20,000 listings. Burnout doesn't come from selling. It actually comes from operating in constant catch-up mode. For me right now, the friction isn't in listing. It's actually in sorting. Because sorting requires classification decisions. Is this velocity? Is this margin stock? Is it liquidation material? That's cognitive load. It's not physically hard, but it's mentally expensive. So the fix isn't slowing down. The fix is separating sorting blocks from listing blocks. When classification blends with output, the friction level rises. But when they're separated, the energy stabilizes. Let me say something that, well, it might sting a little. If you're increasing listing count to relieve pressure instead of redesigning workflow, that's not scaling. It's deferring structure. Sometimes adding more volume feels productive because it distracts us from tightening systems. It's easier to list 50 more cards than it is to redesign your workflow. It's easier to run another half off promotion than it is to calculate true margins. And it's easier to stay busy than it is to slow down and build infrastructure. And if that hits close to home for you, that's not criticism. It's actually very common. But it's also where burnout begins. To understand this, I find it helps to think in terms of system maturity. Not better or worse, just levels of structure. At level 1, we have the hustle mode. We list aggressively, price broadly, run recurring promotions, and react frequently to comps. The cost is a decision fatigue, emotional pricing, and a feeling of constant adjustments. This stage feels productive, but it's very unstable. Burnout happens here most often because volume is being forced without any guardrails. Level 2 is structured volume. We implement some defined listing blocks, defined sourcing blocks, pricing ranges instead of emotional pricing, scheduled promotional cadence, and some basic inventory classification. The benefit becomes reduced cognitive load, some predictable effort, and fewer reactive decisions. It's at this level that effort becomes controlled. And then there's level 3, engineered systems. This is where you have standard operating procedures, inventory tiers, defined review cadence, capital allocation rules, defined work cutoff times, and metrics tracking velocity, not just revenue. And where you find benefit here is energy protection, strategic clarity, scalability without the chaos. The key problem here is that many sellers try to operate at level 3 output while still running level 1 systems. They scale their listing counts, but they don't scale structure. And structure is what protects that energy. If you listen to Adam and I on Wednesday nights on the Dollar Box Live, hopefully you've heard us say this 1,000 times already. There is no single right way to sell cards. Some sellers optimize for high listing count, continuous promotions, and volume driven conversion, while others optimize for controlled allocation, defined price floors, average order value lift, margin protection. Neither approach is universally superior. They're just different optimization models. But each model requires aligned systems. If you want to operate at high volume with recurring promotions, you need organizational discipline, some time discipline, margin discipline, operational review discipline. If you don't build those, volume eventually owns you. Burnout is rarely about the marketplace. It's about misalignment between strategy and infrastructure. So, if you're feeling fatigue in your store right now, ask yourself these questions. Do I have defined listing hours? Do I have pricing bands? Or am I reacting every day? Do I have a promotion schedule, or am I constantly adjusting? Do I classify inventory by behavior, velocity versus margin versus long tail? Do I have a defined stop time each and every day? If the answer to most of these is no, burnout isn't a motivation problem. It's a system problem. And the solution isn't quitting. It's building infrastructure before adding more volume. All right. Well, what do we want to take away from this week's episode? I think it's that burnout rarely comes from effort. It actually comes from friction. And volume without systems creates friction. And friction over time drains you. I will tell you that the single most powerful rule in my system right now isn't volume, it's a stop time. Energy protection is infrastructure. And if you want to scale output, you have to scale infrastructure first, then scale the listings. I want to thank everybody for listening to my so-called card life this week. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Keep building systems, keep protecting your energy, and keep the hobby sustainable.